Hi, I'm Kevin Holm-Hudson, Associate Professor of Music Theory at the University of Kentucky and author of the textbook Music Theory Remixed, published by Oxford University Press. This video concerns triads and seventh chords, the basic elements in Western harmony. And you'll find much more information about triads and seventh chords in Chapter 4 of the textbook. Western harmony is what we call tertian harmony, which means it is based on thirds. And so even some very large, complex sonorities are capable with tertian harmony. For example, this chord, which comes from Gustav Mahler's unfinished 10th Symphony. It's a very large, rich sound, but it can be broken down to thirds. Thirds are the basic elements in tertian harmony, major and minor thirds. So let's look at some examples of triad quality. Triads are chords that are made up of 3 pitches. And again, triads are made up of major or minor thirds in some combination. So this particular sonority is a major triad, and we can abbreviate that with a large M to signify major. We have at its base a major third, and we have on the top a minor third. So we can also represent this just pictorially, not really a fraction or anything, but we can represent it pictorially as a major third below a minor third. And the boundary tones of that chord, the highest and lowest pitches, make up a perfect fifth. Now, if we flip these thirds around so that we have a minor third below a major third, I'm lowering the middle note of the chord, minor third on the bottom, major third on the top. This is a minor triad, and we write that with a small m to indicate minor. We end up with a minor third below a major third. And again, the boundary tones make up a perfect fifth. If we stack 2 major thirds, I've got my C and my E, but now I'm going to take that G and I'm going to raise it. You might remember from the interval funhouse, covered in one of the other videos and also in Chapter 2 of the textbook, that raising the upper note makes the interval larger. So now we have a major third above a major third, the boundary tones then make up an augmented fifth. It's one degree larger than a perfect fifth, and this is an augmented triad. We'll go ahead and spell that out. But the symbol for an augmented triad is a plus symbol. Finally, if we stack 2 minor thirds, so minor third, minor third, and Together, that makes up a diminished fifth. That is a diminished triad. And we signify that with a degree symbol, which we've also seen for diminished intervals. A triad has 3 chord members. When they are arranged in this way, stacked in thirds, major or minor thirds, the lowest note is called the root. The middle note, which is located a third above the root, is called third. And the uppermost note, which is a fifth away from the root, we call the fifth. In a 4-part texture, well, 3 or 4-part texture, when the root is in the bass, I've moved my C down to the bass part, we say that the chord is in root position. Once the chord is in root position, the upper notes can appear in different arrangements. So this is root position. This is root position. This is root position. In each of these arrangements, the root is in the bass. But the root is not necessarily the same as the bass. Bass is a place. It is not a specific note. So the root could be in the bass, and in certain situations, the third or the fifth might be in the bass. And when that happens, we say the chord is in inversion. So these are all examples of root position triads. If we put the third in the bass, so for example, we now have our C, we have our E in the bass, the third, and the G. That is called first inversion. And the symbol for a first inversion triad is a 6. That is because we have a sixth, the interval of a sixth, above the bass. In our root position chords, we have a fifth above the bass, we have a third above the bass, but we do not have a sixth. The sixth above the bass changes this to first inversion. If the chord has the fifth in the bass, something like this, well, now we have a sixth above the bass. We also have a fourth above the bass. So a sixth from the G to the E, and a fourth from the G to the C. The fifth is in the bass. This is called second inversion. And the symbol for this is 6/4. Now, depending on how the chord is arranged, we do not necessarily have to have the note that is a sixth above the bass literally above the note that is a fourth above the bass. These parts could be switched around, but the numbers are written in such a way that the higher number goes on top. So you would not see 4 on top of 6, for example. It would just be written as 6/4, regardless of how the upper voices are arranged in the chord. Now, when you're writing a triad and you're putting it into a 4-voice texture, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, you have one extra voice for the 3 parts. 3 parts that have to somehow fit into a 4-part texture.
And so one of those parts has to be doubled in another voice. The rules for doubling are actually pretty simple. If it is a root position chord, then the root of the chord is doubled, which is to say the bass is doubled, because in a root position chord, the root is in the bass. So in this particular example, our bass note is doubled in the soprano. We have two C's as well as the E and the G. If the triad is in second inversion, so now the fifth of the chord is in the bass. Once again, we double the bass. We double the fifth of the chord in second inversion. And since the fifth of the chord is in the bass, once again, we double the bass. So in most situations for a root position chord or a second inversion chord, we can double the bass. And as you see from these two examples, the voice that can be used to double the bass can vary depending on the spacing that you are using in arranging your chord. So in my root position chord, I'm doubling the bass in the soprano, but in the second inversion example, I'm doubling the bass in the alto voice. You may wonder why I have skipped the first inversion chord, and that is because in a first inversion chord, the actual voice that is being doubled will depend on what comes before or after the first inversion chord. Let me explain what I mean by that. If I have the third in the bass, there may be certain situations where I would want to double the bass and double the third of the chord. There may be a situation where instead of doubling the bass, that I might double the soprano. Both of these are first inversion chords. I'm doubling a different part of the chord in each example. And the reason for this is that if the chord before my first inversion chord, for example, is a root position chord, where I am doubling the root or doubling the bass in the tenor, then if I did that in a first inversion chord right after it, I'd have parallel octaves. So the reason for being flexible with the doubling in a first inversion chord has to do with avoiding the parallel octaves before or after, or parallel fifths before or after the chord. So much for triads. But it's possible to have a chord that consists of 4 different pitches arranged in thirds. So in addition to our root, third, and fifth, we also have a seventh. This is an example of a seventh chord. And seventh chords also have different quality labels. When we were looking at triads, we considered major, minor, augmented, and diminished triads. With seventh chords, the quality has 2 labels. The first part has to do with the quality of the triad that we started with, which in this case is a major triad. The second part of the label has to do with the quality of the seventh above the root. So if we look at the interval from the root to the seventh, in this case going from C to B, we have a major seventh. So putting this together, this is an example of a major, major seventh chord. If we start with our major triad, and have a minor seventh on the top. Major triad, minor seventh. This is called a major minor seventh. Notice the first part refers to the triad. The second part refers to the quality of the seventh, and it will always be in that order. Triad first, and then the quality of the seventh. So this is a major minor seventh chord. It is also sometimes called a dominant seventh. And we will explore why that label pertains to this chord in another video. If we have a minor triad and we add a minor seventh above that, this is a minor minor seventh. We can have a diminished triad. Let's hear what that sounds like. And we can add a minor seventh above the root for this chord, so that if we have a diminished triad but a minor seventh, you would think that they would call this a diminished minor seventh because of the labeling that we've used so far, but this is actually an exception to the rule. This is called a half diminished seventh. And the symbol for that is the diminished symbol, the degree symbol, with a slash through it. A half diminished seventh chord. And then taking my diminished triad, put in our minor seventh, and then using the interval funhouse, we're going to make that minor seventh a little smaller. So we're going to lower our seventh by another half step, and that minor seventh becomes a diminished seventh. So now we have a diminished triad, a diminished seventh, and this is called a fully diminished seventh. The symbol for that is our degree symbol for a diminished triad. So the half diminished seventh is called that because the triad is diminished, but the seventh is not. In the case of a fully diminished seventh, both the triad and the seventh interval are diminished. Like triads, seventh chords can also be found in inversions. Unlike triads, we have 4 pitches in the seventh chord to arrange over the 4 parts, so we do not need to worry about doubling as we did with triads. Having 4 pitches in the chord, however, means that our numerical symbols for the inversions will be different. So I'm going to start with a root position seventh chord. I'm going to stack it in close spacing right now, just so that we can see how that is arranged in thirds. And then I'm going to spread this out over the 4 parts. So my root is going to go down in the bass. I'm going to put the third in the alto. I'll put the 5th in the tenor. And I'll keep the 7th on the soprano. I could arrange these in other possibilities, but this will be fine to demonstrate this. This is a root position 7th chord, but to distinguish it from a root position triad, we need to show that there is the 7th. And so a root position 7th chord will have a number 7 to indicate that it is a root position 7th and not merely a triad. Arranging this chord in first inversion means that we will have the third in the bass, and putting it into close spacing, it looks something like this. So my third is in the bass. I'm going to put the root in the tenor. I'll put the fifth in the alto, and I'll put the seventh in the soprano. And so now I have a sixth above the bass, as I did with the first inversion triad, but I also have a fifth above the bass, which is actually creating dissonance with the root. Let's hear what that chord sounds like. So here was our root position chord. Putting it into first inversion, the way that I've written it out, sounds like this, and the dissonance is between our tenor and our soprano. So because we have a sixth above the bass and also a fifth above the bass, we represent that with the numbers 6, 5 for first inversion. Now, implied in this is the fourth voice in the texture. We have a sixth above the bass, we have a fifth above the bass. There is also that third above the bass. But generally speaking, we don't add that to the figured bass or to the inversion symbol unless there's something being chromatically altered, which we're not going to be concerning ourselves with right now. The dissonance is created between the sixth above the bass and the fifth above the bass, and so that is shown in our inversion symbol. If I put the fifth in the bass, the chord is going to stack like this in close spacing. We have the fifth in the bass. I will keep the root in the tenor. Let's put the third in the alto, and we'll keep the seventh in the soprano as we've had for the other ones. Now we have a fourth above the bass, as we did for the second inversion triad. But we also have a third above the bass, which again is creating that dissonance with the part that is a fourth above the bass. So this chord now sounds like this. And the dissonance is found there, again, between the tenor and the soprano in this particular arrangement. This is second inversion because we've got the fifth of the chord in the bass, and the numerical symbol for a second inversion seventh chord is 4-3 because we have the fourth above the bass and we've also got that third above the bass. Finally, with the seventh chord, since we do have that additional tone, we have an additional inversion that is possible, which is when we put the seventh of the chord in the bass. I'm going to put that down here. I could have it an octave above, but I want to give myself a little more space to arrange the other parts. And I will keep the root in the tenor. I will keep the third in the alto, and I will put the fifth in the soprano. Putting these into close spacing looks like this. And so now, really, the strongest dissonance is the second. So that goes in our numerical symbol. And there's also a fourth above the bass, which was also traditionally considered a dissonance. So we have a 4-2 for our third inversion. We did not have third inversion triads. We only had 2 inversions besides root position. But with 7th chords, we add an additional inversion. And now we see that there is a pattern to the numbers that are involved in the inversion symbols. We start with 7. The next inversion gives us 6-5. The next inversion gives us 4-3. And the final inversion replaces a 3 with a 2. So it's something like a countdown. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And that's a convenient way to remember the inversion symbols. There's also one last thing I can point out here regarding inversions. And if you're trying to figure out a particular 7th chord, a convenient method is to first arrange those tones in the closest arrangement that you can within an octave. So that's what we did here, and here, and here, and here. And we see that when we do this, first of all, if all 4 tones just stack vertically, all of them on lines or all of them on spaces, it's going to be root position. Any inversion is going to give you a second somewhere in the chord. So we see in first inversion, we've got the second there. In second inversion, we've got the second stacked up midway. And then in third inversion, we've got the second stacked up at the bottom. When you locate that second inside the inverted chord, the uppermost note of the 2 is the root. So we see here we had the root was C, but in this second, the top note is C. That's our root. That's our root. That's our root. And so that can be a quick way of identifying 7th chords as well. I'm Kevin Holm-Hudson, and this is Music Theory Remixed. You'll find much more information about triads and 7th chords in Chapter 4 of the textbook.